LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here.
Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Glad to have you on board. I hope you've had a great week. I've certainly had a busy early February, late January was when I'm recording some of this material, so it has certainly been tough for me. I trust that you've had a great week yourself. Do take a few moments, if you would, and subscribe to the channel. You can just sort of ring the bell as well as to make sure that you're going to be getting future updates of our podcast. Those of you that don't want to use YouTube, you can also visit me on Rumble. Just go to Wildlife Control Consultant, and my podcast will be located there as well. You can also drop me a line, if you would, at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear from you, your trials, questions, and I'll respond back to you or talk about some of the issues on the show. And of course, you can also suggest topics for the show, or perhaps you want to be on the show yourself. I'd love to hear from you. So again, that's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. So this week we are continuing our just lengthy interview with Dr. Niam Quinn. She is a professor, let me get the title out here, Human-Wildlife Interaction Advisor at the University of California Cooperative Extension, and she's in the LA area. She actually does more than just LA County, so she does more than that, but her job is involved in handling those conflicts down there, and so she is becoming a leading researcher in the area of rodent control. As you well know, if you've been listening to the podcast, California, of course, has enacted some of the most strictest rodenticide bans in the country. In other words, people can only use second gens. For instance, it has to be a professional and under certain circumstances, and they only allow second gens in like agricultural situations in limited circumstances. Very restrictive, very challenging, and a lot of this attitude, of course, is spreading across the country. Right now, we're in the midst of the EPA's preliminary decision, PID, preliminary impact decision. I forgot what the I meant. But they're making some major changes to rodenticide labels. Proposed interim decision. There it is. Proposed interim decision for rodenticides. And that is coming up here on February 13th. And that's the deadline. And if people don't make that deadline, that's the last period of comment. It is not, I don't think it's going to be likely that the comment period is going to continue. They've kind of denied that, but there may be extended comments perhaps with the wealth. When I uploaded my comments, there was, I think, 1,700 already at this point, and we're not even at Monday yet. So I'm on Thursday prior, so February 9th is when I'm recording this. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But Dr. Quinn will be talking in this particular segment. This is part 2. There's going to be at least a part 3. So if you haven't listened so far, I would encourage you to go back to the previous podcast, get the situation, because this goes on for almost 2 hours. And so we've been breaking it up into chunks. So the first half hour is, of course, part 1. We're now dealing with part 2, which is about another half hour of my interview with her. And so the topics that she's talking about, of course, are trapping in the West Coast Rodent Academy, which is something that she has been involved in. It's probably, by the time you hear this, it's probably are going to be filled, but don't cry or don't mourn, because she also has another one coming up in November for those of you that want to attend that, so you definitely want to check that out. And then she's talking about some interesting research that she's done into the area of isotopes. This is where they can actually track the rodenticide from a specific spot and whether it's getting into the specific animal. And so they're able to trace this through multiple levels of multiple trophic levels is the word I'm looking for. For example, so if you have a rodenticide with this isotope, you're able to then, okay, the rat eats it, then the coyote eats the rat, the coyote gets killed by a mountain lion, and you can track where that rodenticide goes and know exactly where it was. And so they're doing some of this research, and they're even able to find this isotope, of course, in feces, and so they're doing feces surveys. It's remarkable information. And so, because we're going to find out, she's going to ultimately find out where these rodenticides are they coming from bait stations, or are they coming from somewhere else? And she's proposing that various pesticide manufacturers have to do this type of testing to see where their rodenticides are going into the environment. Very interesting stuff. It could really answer a lot of questions. Unfortunately, like all things, it's not cheap. So I'm glad you're here. Stay tuned. Dr. Niam Quinn, again, she is Human Wildlife Interaction Advisor from the University of California Cooperative Extension. Here we go.
I think the difference and I can see that with certain pest control companies because there's so much emphasis on production. They also make more money, but in the wildlife control field, where we often don't have access to the rodenticides because many wildlife control operators don't have a pest control license, and for the animals they control, there is no pesticide legal anyway, so it doesn't matter. But they will. There's something about trappers, as it were, although wildlife control is more than just trapping. You're always tweaking, and you have to spend the time because trapping in and of itself is so time intensive that you have to spend a little bit more time. You can't just simply drop your bait station every 15 feet. You just can't.
I think that happens with rats too. I just don't think we know how to do it. And it's funny. I feel like trapping is definitely a science. But I don't think that any trappers have ever, or any scientists have ever worked with any trappers to figure it out. But I know from our coyote work, when I'm working with our trappers, I can see them. I just know we're going to be successful because I can feel their energy from the trap set, right? And it's so funny. I remember one of it was a couple of months ago, we were out with our trapper. It's a county trapper in LA, and we're in a flood control basin, and it had rained a bit, but not then. We can't really trap when it rains because we're under a lot of different constraints as scientists, ethical constraints, and we really don't want our coyotes to get out, out from and especially we trap in a lot of debris basins, so they're more wet than your typical trapping sites sometimes. And so, but it had been wet, it dried up, and our trapper, a guy that called Burgos, was like, "Oh, these coyotes are massive." And I was like, "Nah, it's been raining." But he's like, "We're definitely going to catch that big one." I was like, "Nah, I don't know, Stephen." And that's why I work with trappers, because I'm not stupid enough to think that I can do it myself. Sure, I nearly swore there, but sure enough, and 38 pounds is a big coyote for California. That's a big Western coyote.
Yeah.
This thing was massive, absolutely giant. That's one of the biggest coyotes we've ever recovered. Never mind, it is the biggest coyote we've ever caught.
Wow,
but it's funny. It's I think it's science because I think for a trapper it's intuition, right? But if you have that. But if you make those observations over and over and over and over and over again, that is science. And so
it is, yeah.
But I think that it's the same for the bait station. I think that as a trapper, you would never plop down your trap, ever. You're there's so many different things. What time of year is it? Are they more interested in and I don't know all the different terms for the scents, but some of them are more territorial type ones. Some of them are a little bit more food based.
Yeah. So you have food, curiosity, you have the pheromone type lures that are out there. So
and we have all that for insects and stuff as well. What do we have for rodents? Absolutely nothing.
Well, that's an interesting thing because there's some products being marketed now. I know of one that's being marketed now that says it takes away the rodent fear. And I was doing some literature work, and I think I found a product, but I just have to play with it. But they're talking about some very micro, it's like a pheromone. So I'd be interested to see if that's true. But there's a lot of lure making and trapping is sort of like the alchemy of chemistry. There's a lot of mystique with it, and the magic goal is trying to find that lure that's going to just pull them in. But the reality is, location is always best. It's always number one, and the lure just brings them the last few feet, or it may help them overcome some fear, basically. But at least but we haven't had the kind of research on some of these baits I would like to see, because again, it's so time consuming and expensive.
And it's difficult to work in a managed system as well, right? So like it's really hard to be like, if you're thinking about trying to find like a control site. So as like a scientist, like it's really important to have like the nothing, right? The no management, the coyotes that are not exposed to rodenticide.
Right.
Those places, those things don't really exist. And so it does make it more difficult as well. So it's a good challenge, and it's sometimes, and then some days you're just like, oh Jesus, what did I get myself into? Like it's just difficult.
So let's try to transition. So you've done a lot of rodent work now, and you're doing more. So that's coming. You have your Rodent Academy coming up soon. That's coming up in March. It's almost full. Probably by the time people hear this, it will be full. Talk a little bit about that for people to sort of think about if they wanted to come and attend that in the future.
Yeah, well, it's called the West Coast Rodent Academy, and certainly there are other rodent academies out there. So just don't think that the one in California is the only one. I mean, I think it's the best one, obviously.
Sure.
But, there's ones in Texas and New Orleans, and there's ones in Arizona, and I think there's developments to get some in other states as well. And obviously there's the original Rodent Academy by Bobby Corrigan in New York.
In New York, that's right.
And so our Rodent Academy is held twice a year, generally in March and in November. And it's a 3-day event, and it's chocker block. Like there's a lot going on in there. And we talk about a lot of things, it's really, we kind of start at the start with like rodent biology, behavior, ID, which are kind of like the building blocks to any rodent management program. And then we move into like disease, and like it's more about the PMP or the customers. Like it's not about like random rodent diseases. It's kind of the diseases that a PMP could be exposed to, right? And it's funny because I ask at the start of every Rodent Academy how many people have been exposed to a rodent disease, and I'm generally the only one that puts up my hand. So I always say, do as I say, not do as I do, because you can make very stupid decisions as a field biologist sometimes. You're
not the only one. We get careless in the field. Yes.
Yeah. And it can be very dangerous, and a lot of people that are presenting with these unusual diseases are actually PMPs that are doing wildlife body recovery in subspaces, things like that, right? So we do that. There's a huge focus on exclusion, which we've already talked about. It's a very, very important part of a program that I think that people often neglect. And I think that I think that what's great about exclusion is that exclusion for a mouse and exclusion for a possum, it's the same. It's almost the same thing, right? It's just about the general tools that you need. And so the guy that leads our exclusion breakout, it's all hands-on, and we have a number of hands-on things as well. So it's not just classroom learning, but like we get people out so they can get their hands dirty and just not just sitting on their backsides all day. Like it can get very boring to be listening to, and it's not all science driven. So it's not just me standing up there, it's peer led as well, right? So if people from the industry that have actually experience in the industry. Now I can whack rats with the best of them for sure, Stephen, but like it's not my job, right? My job is science, but it's important to have people that are like understand the industry. And I understand the industry too, but I'm not in it, right? And so we work with a lot of different manufacturing partners, our distribution partners. We have people from different cities come in and talk about trapping, talk about rodenticide. Even we have things about talking to the media, because what happens when you mess up? What happens when you get reported to a company, or what happens when you have a rat fall out of a ceiling in a restaurant that you manage. And like that happens all the time.
Right.
And companies are just not prepared for it.
No.
Or the PMP gets they get like ambushed when they're there on their service. And so like we do even stuff like this. And then like we actually make our PMPs develop and sell us a rodent survey. So they have to use everything that they've learned in the first like 2.5 days, and in the final day, like they're split into groups, and then they have to do we develop like scenarios. And it's funny because a lot of my scenarios are actually real scenarios that are based on like friends or like situations that I've been involved in. And then they have to talk about like they have to. And we're not really interested in price. Like we're just kind of interested in how they use the information, like what different, like, are they using new technologies? Are they thinking about how they use their rodenticides differently? Are they thinking about the health impacts of the job? Because maybe one of the jobs isn't actually like a musk job, like a house mouse job. Maybe it's actually permiscus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And are they thinking about the health implications of things like that?
Right.
And then we actually have 3 prizes. We have the Innovators Award. So just someone that's just, you don't even have to think that far out the box. Even if you have like a plan that encompasses everything or thinks a little bit different. We have a technical award, which I generally grill them and ask them the technical questions. And if you get it wrong, you don't win the prize, right? But then one of my favorites is that we get someone from our administrative staff to come in who knows nothing about rodents, right? And she grills them. It's great. Like, and it's just like dealing with the customer, right? That knows nothing. Well, what about my cat? Or I don't want poison. Like, I've heard that they get thirsty and they die in the walls or whatever, and then they have to be able to react to that based on the scientific or like technical information that they've received. So like, I think it's really, I mean, I'm biased, but I do think it's really great. And we've collected a lot of information from surveys. People learn a lot. People are able to use the tools that we give them. And then, they make great links from, industry as well. And, we've had everybody from people that have literally never done a rodent job before. Like, it's day one, to people that have been on the job for like 50 years and they're still learning things.
Do you have a manual? Is there a manual with it?
So we do.
Yep.
And I don't know if anyone's ever been to Bobby Corrigan's academy, but like I was like lifting weights by the time I was coming home on the plane.
Yep.
And so like we tried to condense that down. And like some of our stuff is on the website, and we are actually trying to condense it down even more. Like, we want it to be something that you put in your glove box and then that you can pull out every so often if you have a question. But people don't use it that often. Like, people, because like you're too busy, right? You're in the field and you're too busy. And like then after you're done with your Terry, after your 350 bait stations in the 95 degrees Southern California, like the last thing you want to do is open a flipping manual to like see what's
But what about those of us who like to get into the weeds? Well,
you will definitely be able to take your manual home with you if you ever attend, Stephen. So
because I've been to Corrigan's twice. I was privileged to get out there to Corrigan's twice, but I think because when I was doing some research, I'm revising Frischman's book on the vertebrate pest manual, and I'm narrowing it down just for commensals. I was disappointed with how hard it was to find the same kind of parallel information that we have on Norway rats. Like, they'll have, how far can a Norway rat fall and survive, right? They have where people were just tossing, tossing animals out or having them jump. And it was interesting to see how we don't have the same level of data because roof rat, because you like to kind of put them in a parallel line, what's their birth rate, how many times, and it's like we don't know. Like, what do you mean we don't know? And we don't know. And I'm like, how is this possible?
You knew Rex Baker, right? Have you met Rex from Cal Poly Pomona? Yeah. And like Rex was, I think I have these great ideas, and I would go to Rex, who has obviously since passed on, and I would go to Rex and I go, hey Rex, I have this great idea, and he's like, oh yeah, we did that. Like, but like he never had time to publish it because he was very focused on his teaching as well.
Yeah.
And so, and then his house went on fire, and everything that he could have published went on fire.
Oh, no.
And so like I'd say like Rex's files have like so much information. But what's interesting is that even though Rex was based in Southern California, what was all his research on?
Well, he did things on Pocket Go. I have a stuff on
But it was
Pocket
nori rats.
Gopher and
His rat
Norway.
focused research was all nori rats, and part of it was because in some of the like there was like duck farms and like things like that that did have a lot of nori rats back in the day, but they're all gone, and along with them, the nori rats have essentially vanished from Orange County at least.
And so they've been filled in by roof rats.
Yeah, because roof
Interesting.
rats because there's no trash. And that's like that's it goes back to my hypothesis. Why are there no Norway rats in Orange County? Because there's nothing for them to eat.
Yeah, so that's a fascinating. Well, I'll be interested in how that explores out. So, if people want to have the Rodent Academy in their own state, is there a program that they could either import you folks to go lead the class, or is this something where you would have like the materials and you would say, "Here's go and go forth and do your thing," or is it how would that work for them?
We would be delighted. I'm not saying that I'm going to have all the time to travel to whatever
Right.
50 states. And it's interesting, like we have someone coming to the Rodent Academy for their second time from Alaska, which is interesting. But we would love to have that conversation with like if it's like a state association, like your state like association for pest management, whether it's an academic that's in cooperative extension or even not in a land grant university. I would be so happy to like discuss our model. And like I think like if like just for example, like they wanted to host a rodent academy in Montana, I'd be like, wow, I know this guy called Stephen Vantassel that knows a
Right.
lot about. But you know what I mean? Like sometimes
Yeah,
it's the connection is missing,
sure. Yeah.
right?
So
So
that's all available. Well, that's something for people because there are most of our industry has just small businesses, often one person operations, but there are some that are getting larger and they will actually sometimes host a training event and bring in other corporations and have, 20 or 30 people and that sort of. So definitely we'll provide that information. Again, it's Dr. Niam Quinn out of University of California Cooperative Extension. She is on the web, so she's not that hard to find. How about we transition over into coyotes? Are you doing anything more with coyotes?
yes, we are. But coyotes are the reason I study coyotes is because of rats, right? So
Interesting. You
I
study
am not
coyotes because of rats?
well, it's because of rodenticides, right?
Oh, right, right, right.
Right.
Okay. All right.
And
Okay.
so I think that people that work with coyotes are absolutely flipping crazy, Stephen. Like I can't believe that A, people do it for fun, and B, people do it for money. Um and like I'm like, like I'm obviously not from a place that has coyotes, right? And so I'm all like naive and like
Right.
I'm a fairly positive person, but trapping coyotes will stamp that positivity out of you.
How are you trapping them? Are you using cages?
No, we're not that bad. Okay,
Okay.
we're
Well,
not
that's
that bad. So we use the collarum
okay.
because
All right.
I can't catch a non-target, right? There's so many implications for me if we catch a non-target. And
Oh,
so
got you. All right, for IACUC. That for those of you who are listening, Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee is the governing body that manages animal research in the university, and so researchers, as Niam Quinn is obligated to follow the guidelines of this Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. Having been through it, it is yeah, I'm so glad in the state I don't have to fuss with it. So
there's a lot of swear words generally that are incorporated with discussions with IACUC that
yes,
we won't say here.
it's gotten worse. It's one of the reasons why people don't go into wildlife research is
It,
because it's such a pain.
I don't think that I think it's a necessary step. Like I think we should be like especially if death's an endpoint, like we shouldn't be killing more things than we need to. But when it
Yeah.
comes to rats, it's frustrating because people are out there every day doing it, and here we
Right.
are trying to do it as
No,
ethically
I
as
totally
possible.
agree. Sometimes there's been some research where we're just repeating the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result, and that gets a little useless. But the problem is that when you're doing lethal research, they like
Oh, they hate it.
they're getting on your nerves. In a lot of universities won't even allow it anymore. And
No,
so it's like, well, what's the point?
so our isotopically labeled bait, which is and we talked about it before on the podcast, where like we're trying to develop this bait and we're not trying anymore. We've been successful, right? We're trying to develop this bait that we can trace up multiple trophic levels. So like if a rat eats it, we know, but then if a coyote eats that rat, then we know. And we've never had that before. We've never had a tool that we can trace through multiple levels. We've had tools where we can trace through one level, right? Like different things. We have this tool now, and this project has been a nightmare, and the nightmare started with Ayacook, right? That we had they were really unhappy that we had to kill all the rats because we had to be able to feed the rats to the coyotes. Now we didn't kill any coyotes. That was another Ayacook journey, right?
But you weren't doing your study on the rats, were you?
No, we weren't, but we still needed Ayacook approval to kill the rats because they were part of the study. So I needed Ayacook approval to kill the rats. Then I needed separate Ayacook approval to feed the rats to the coyotes. And then I needed more approval to do our pilot study, which is what we are in now. And so what we were trying to do is we were trying to develop this bait. And like the reason why we're trying to develop this bait is because, I had this like whole succession plan of really what we wanted to achieve. And like what we wanted to achieve is to provide governing agencies with a tool to get research-driven mitigation measures, or to be able to test the success of mitigation measures. And we have that tool now. Granted, we've proven that it works in a controlled situation, but we haven't proven that we can do it in a field. And now I think because it works in the control situation, it doesn't actually matter that we have this very small pilot study, mainly because our tool is ridiculously expensive, ridiculously expensive, but I think it's totally worth it. It works really well. We can detect it. We've developed methods to detect rodenticide in fur and in feces.
So you can do a hair capture study, then you can just do hair snags?
That's what we wanted to do, is we wanted to do hair snares, but what we figured out in the process is that you'd have to literally Brazilian wax your animal to get enough hair for it to work. But we know that, just say, and this happens all the time for, just say we have people in the Northwest that have done fisher work and they've recovered just pelts of animals. You could actually test them for rodenticide exposure now, right? You could, a scavenged animal, you could also test. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not really sure, but
I think that's a good thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an extra tool, right? And it's it increases your sample size and increases the sample of the things that you are able to do. So I was just really excited. Now what we're doing now for our coyote work is we are trying to trace rodenticide exposure in live carnivores, which has never been done before, right? All rodenticide researchers do is they scrape dead stuff off the road, right? And you're already dead, right? And so have you lived with your rodenticide exposure? Have you been exposed multiple times? Where have you been exposed? So we have this great student that basically walks miles and miles and miles several times a week, and she goes to the areas where these collared coyotes are, and she's a poo picker upper. That's, and she picks up fresh scat. And so what we do is, and people are probably going to start rolling their eyes because this is just ridiculous science, right? So we split the poo in half. Half goes to one lab. And I don't know if you know this, but probably most of your listeners don't know this, but when you poo, you cover your feces with a layer of your own epithelial cells. So your own skin covers your poop. Everybody.
So you DNA it as well then?
Yeah, so we DNA it, so we know if it actually came from one of the coyotes that we captured.
Nice.
And then the other half, so that half goes to UC Davis, and then the other half goes to NWRC in Fort Collins in Colorado, and then they have developed the methods to test not just for anticoagulant rodenticides, also for cholecalciferol, also for bromethylin.
Really?
So it's
nice.
We're super excited. And you said about funding earlier, we got a huge injection of funding from the Anticoagulant Rodenticide Task Force for this project as well.
They're putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, and this project was also funded by the California Department of Pesticide Regulation as well. And it's just so important to be able to monitor rodenticide exposure in live animals. So it's kind of we kind of had this big, hairy, audacious goal essentially where it started with the isotopically labeled bait, but like it kind of expanded to, wait, we don't even need the isotopically labeled bait to just monitor it in general.
Yeah.
Now, it would be great if we have mitigation measures that are saying, hey, you can't broadcast, but you can use bait stations. Well, how do you know which one's better? How do you, like, there's no measure, but like with an isotopically labeled bait, like in a situation that's already saturated with rodenticide, right? Which I think is almost all ag and urban situations now.
Yeah, I think this is what I struggle with. I mean, you're really on the, this is what when, in terms of the EPA's preliminary interim decision, right? They're really cracking down. They want to crack down on broadcast use and spot use, especially around recreational areas, golf courses, and those types of things. I haven't really seen that in the some of the ag areas or the like rangeland and things like that. It seems like we're still going to be able to use it there. But it seems like they want everything to go to bait stations. I'm not convinced that bait stations are by definition safer than doing spot baiting or a broadcast.
You know why they'd be safer is because nobody will use them, right? I mean, it's just
I don't want to say that the EPA wants to, ban it all. I think that's kind of what we're doing. My motto is if something works, we ban it. If it works great, we ban it faster.
Yeah.
I think I'm wondering if we should go back to 1080 and simply let producers control the species and have one treatment and be done with it for a while and have something real rather than having to keep going out and trying to control the stuff that's not working.
This whole like stabbing, like there is a problem, right? I mean, I don't know exactly the extent of the problem. I mean, is exposure a problem or is intoxication a problem, right? Because that's totally different, right? And I think that's kind of what we're facing in California. Like we're even going to the point where we think that Southern California coyotes are not as susceptible to rodenticide. And so like we're starting to do like genomic like research to see if that's true. Because 99% of our sample is exposed to anticoagulant rodenticide.
Yeah, because we don't know what that real level of effect is. We don't know what the lowest level of effect is for a coyote. How much exposure do they need to get before there's a negative effect? It's going to be different for different species, right?
Well, I always say that this is the example I always use. And I always pick on the poor guy that sat in the front row of my talk, right? Right. So I'm an Irish woman. And now I actually don't drink. I'm a terrible example of an Irish woman. But just say when in my day when I did drink a lot, when I used to play rugby and had a liver like a cement mixer, essentially. I could drink 10 pints, right? I bring an American with me and they drink 10 pints, right? I wake up in the morning and I'm hungover. That's a sublethal effect. The American does not wake up in the morning. That's a lethal effect.
He's
right?
Dead. Right.
Right. And it's the same toxicant, the same species, and totally different reaction to the same thing. And like it's even interesting, like if you think like a coyote versus a mountain lion, like coyotes don't have to work that hard to get their food, right? And if they're exposed to rodenticide, and we're all busting capillaries, like even just sitting here and not really moving that much, but like they're clotting themselves. You think of a coyote, right? They don't really have to work that hard to get their food. However, a mountain lion, it's like literally like a roller coaster to get a meal, right? And so like the effect of rodenticide could even between the species could be much worse on certain species than something like it because of things like that. They may be more susceptible because of life history stuff. And it's really complicated and it's not very black and white. And I feel like EPA have completely missed the point. Like I think that there's mitigation measures needed, but it's like this, right? They're like, it's just... Or like they're reaching into a bag and being like, whoa, this is a good idea. Let's try this one.
Well, I'm sure the lawsuits didn't help because they're trying to flail around. Sometimes lawsuits are a blunt instrument, right? So it's, which I don't know.
They have to do something, but there's like my point is now is that we have a tool and they should, like, they don't have to come to me to use it. I don't care, right? We will have this published eventually. And people should be, like, manufacturers should be forced to use it, right?
Yeah.
Right. And yes, it's expensive. It's not cheap. Most things aren't cheap, and so it's not ideal. And like it took us a lot of troubleshooting to manufacture it. I seriously, I barely even knew what an isotope was when I started, Stephen. And we had all these crazy ideas that we were literally going to mix it in a bowl in the lab. Well, no, that's not how it happened, right? It's way more complicated than that.
Right.
And like our isotope was made by someone, and then it got sent to France, and then it came back to Milwaukee, and then it was in Fort Collins, and then it was in Logan, and
wow.
And
Wow, well, that's been the end of part 2 of my interview with Dr. Niam Quinn of the University of California Cooperative Extension. She is the Human Wildlife Interactions Advisor located around LA and the counties surrounding LA as well. I hope you've enjoyed this. We're really getting into some weeds here. I think you're going to find it's interesting. You're going to get a glimpse of some future technology that's going to be used in the area of rodent control and some of the complex questions that maybe your clients are going to have. So I hope you enjoyed this, but stay tuned. There's going to be more. We have part 3 coming up next week, and perhaps part 4. It depends on how I divide up that last hour of our conversation. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife podcast. Definitely reach out to me, if you would, at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Thoughts, suggestions for new shows, perhaps you know someone or a company that wants to be on the show. We'd love to have them, love to talk to them about the possibility of being on the show. We have a very broad audience here, and anything related to vertebrate pest control, as well as the business side, I'm all ears. Would love to have you to give that information out to the public. Again, that's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Also, please subscribe to the channel, whether you do it here on YouTube or go over to Rumble and subscribe there. Would be glad to have you. I'd really appreciate your support. And lastly, again, this is Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everyone, and stay tuned for next week for part 3. Thanks for watching.